Ford has just confirmed what every Wall Street whisper feared: a $3 billion tariff hit for 2025 and a profit outlook slashed overnight. U.S. GDP shrank 0.5% in the first quarter, before the latest round of tariffs even took effect. The numbers landed like a 1-2 punch. Before factories felt the full impact, orders froze, investments stalled. And in the middle of the storm, one of America's most iconic automakers blinked, pulling its financial guidance, then returning with a sobering downgrade. If tariffs were meant to protect, why do they feel like the first crack in the armor? For Canada, the U.S. tariff shock wasn't just an economic headline. It was a direct strike at one of the country's most integrated and export-dependent industries. The auto sector accounts for roughly 14 billion Canadian dollars in annual exports to the U.S., with Ontario's manufacturing corridor stretching from Windsor to Oshawa serving as the backbone. In this strip of assembly plants and supplier networks, made in Canada often means made for America. When the White House confirmed a 25% levy on imported vehicles and a range of components, the message to Canadian producers was unmistakable. Their most important customer just turned into their most aggressive negotiator. Ottawa's first response was diplomatic. Trade Minister Mary Ung called the tariffs unwarranted and counterproductive, citing decades of tightly integrated production under the Auto Pact, NAFTA, and USMCA. Canadian officials pressed Washington for exemptions, arguing that vehicles and parts meeting USMCA's strict regional content rules should be spared. Behind closed doors, negotiators pointed out that Canadian-made vehicles already contain an average of 50 to 60% U.S.-sourced parts, meaning the tariffs would in many cases punish American suppliers too. But diplomacy had limits. When it became clear that exemptions would be narrow and temporary, Canada prepared to retaliate. By mid-April, Ottawa unveiled a targeted countermeasure package, $8 billion Canadian dollars in tariffs on a list of U.S. goods designed to hit politically sensitive regions. The list included not only American-made vehicles, but also agricultural products, industrial equipment, and even certain consumer goods. The goal: by the end of summer 2025, the U.S.-Canada auto tariff dispute had hardened into a stalemate. Both sides had staked their political ground too publicly to retreat without extracting concessions. In Washington, the administration doubled down on the reciprocal tariff mantra, framing any backtracking as weakness in an election year. In Ottawa, walking away from countermeasures risked alienating unions, manufacturers, and provincial leaders already feeling the strain. The integrated nature of the industry, once a source of resilience, now deepened the deadlock. Automakers on both sides of the border warned that shifting supply chains was neither quick nor painless. Every month of higher costs meant delayed investments, deferred hiring, and mounting pressure to relocate production closer to end markets, potentially hollowing out decades-old industrial hubs. Negotiators floated limited workarounds, temporary exemptions for certain EV models, phased reductions in component tariffs tied to domestic content benchmarks, or joint investments in North American supply chains for critical minerals. But each proposal ran into political red lines. For Washington, exemptions risked undermining the deterrent power of its new trade posture. For Ottawa, accepting them without full removal of tariffs risked signaling defeat. In the meantime, the market adapted, not always in ways policymakers wanted. U.S. dealers began sourcing more vehicles from domestic plants or non-tariffed regions, while some Canadian firms explored pivoting to European or Asian buyers. But these shifts were partial and costly, leaving both economies locked in a high-friction status quo. The message from the border was clear. What once moved freely now moved cautiously, if at all. The numbers in Ottawa's trade bulletins told only part of the story. The real weight of the tariffs could be felt on the factory floor in Windsor, Ontario, home to one of Stellantis' largest North American assembly plants. Known for producing minivans for the U.S. market, The plant suddenly found its best-selling models priced thousands of dollars higher across the border. U.S. dealers, already facing slowing demand from higher interest rates, began trimming orders. The ripple effect hit quickly. Suppliers clustered along the Highway 401 corridor reported canceled shipments and delayed payments. One parts manufacturer in Guelph, specializing in aluminum engine components, said orders from U.S.-bound production lines fell 15% within 2 months. "We've weathered downturns before," the owner told a local business paper, "but this one feels different because it's policy-driven, not market-driven." The EV sector, which Ottawa has been betting on as the future of Canadian manufacturing, faced its own headwinds. Ford's Oakville plant, slated to become an all-electric facility by 2026, relies on cross-border flows of battery cells and modules. The new tariffs not only increased costs on imported U.S. components, but also raised the price of finished vehicles shipped south. That complicated the business case for ramping up EV exports, at a time when both countries are competing to attract battery and assembly investments. Communities built around auto jobs saw economic anxiety creep in. Restaurants near the Windsor plant reported fewer lunch rushes. Local governments worried about tax revenue if production cuts became layoffs. And while Ottawa's $8 billion Canadian dollars counter-tariff package was meant to show strength, the reality on the ground was more complicated. The U.S. is Canada's top export market, and even targeted retaliation couldn't insulate industries from collateral damage. In the short term, Canadian automakers scrambled to reroute supply chains, looking to source more components domestically or from countries not hit by U.S. tariffs. But for a sector that has thrived on just-in-time cross-border efficiency, these workarounds came with added costs and slower production cycles. For Canada, the tariffs weren't just a trade dispute, they were a stress test of its entire manufacturing model. South of the border, the blowback was more subtle, but no less real. In Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky, states central to America's auto heartland, manufacturers felt the squeeze from higher input costs. Even companies assembling vehicles entirely within U.S. borders often relied on Canadian parts. Engines, transmissions, aluminum castings, and advanced electronics that crossed the border multiple times before reaching final assembly. Ford's own U.S. operations absorbed a $3 billion tariff-related cost projection for 2025, according to its Q2 earnings update. That number wasn't just about imported vehicles, it reflected the cumulative effect of duties on components and the knock-on costs from retaliatory measures. The company's EV division, already struggling with losses of up to $5.5 billion this year, faced added pressure from pricier batteries and electronics. Consumers began to feel it too. Kelley Blue Book data in August showed average transaction prices for some models climbing by $1,500 to $3,000 compared to early 2025, with much of the increase attributed to tariffs. In an inflation-conscious market, that price bump was enough to push some buyers toward used vehicles or cheaper imports from non-tariffed countries. The pain wasn't limited to the auto sector. Ottawa's counter-tariffs on U.S. agricultural exports hit soybean and dairy producers in Wisconsin and Iowa, cutting into farm revenues and stirring political pressure in Congress. Small manufacturers that supplied Canadian plants also saw orders dry up. A metal stamping company in Indiana, which produced precision parts for Canadian-assembled SUVs, reported laying off 40 workers by midsummer. Politically, the tariffs became a talking point in both directions. Supporters framed them as a necessary price for economic independence, arguing that the short-term pain would be offset by reshoring production. Critics warned that the policy was eroding competitiveness, inviting retaliation, and ultimately hurting workers it claimed to defend. For the U.S., the tariffs underscored a paradox. Even in an era of protectionist rhetoric, America's prosperity is still intertwined with its neighbors. Breaking those links came with costs that could not be confined neatly to the other side of the border. The US and Canada now stand at a trade crossroads unlike any in the modern era of their relationship. Decades of integration have given way to a colder, more transactional stance, where even allies treat each other as competitors. Automakers, suppliers, and workers on both sides of the border are navigating a reality in which every shipment is a calculation, and every policy announcement could redraw the map of North American manufacturing. Neither Washington nor Ottawa can easily back down without political cost. Yet the longer the stalemate drags on, the harder it will be to restore the trust that once made this industry seamless. The question is no longer just about tariffs. It's about the future of the entire cross-border economy. Which way will North America turn? Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more.